With Battlefield being my favourite game franchise, I'm kind of always thinking about what's going to come next. I love playing the brand new content that releases, but there's just a part of my mind that cannot stop thinking about what is next on the horizon. We now know that the next Battlefield game is not going to launch until 2021, very likely that that's going to be October 2021, so we've got nearly a 2-year period for Battlefield 5 to expand a little bit. At the moment, we're fighting in the Pacific. We've got Americans and Japanese engaging in all-out war, we're hopping across islands, and we're fighting to control the Pacific waters. But looking further beyond that, where are we going to go next in World War II? There's still plenty of this conflict to explore in future chapters, lots of iconic battles and locations that could end up featuring, so in this video, I'm going to set out my ideas for where I think DICE is going to go next for the game over the next year or so. And I'm also going to shill my merch again. Born to shill. Just a few days left to grab it before it's gone. Link in the description. Okay, first of all then, Chapter 6, right after War in the Pacific. Personally, I don't think we're going to move away from the Pacific that quickly. I think DICE has some plans to stick with the Pacific a little bit longer into Chapter 6, and we'll see the team extend the Pacific combat with a 4th map for the theatre. Now, I spoke about this in another video earlier this week, but according to data miner Temporal, so this is unofficial information, there is a 4th map alluded to in the Battlefield 5 files, currently labelled as Jungle. And that doesn't fit with the setting for Iwo Jima, Pacific Storm, or the upcoming Wake Island map. Now, DICE hasn't officially confirmed the existence of a 4th map yet, and has only stated that 3 maps will be releasing for the Pacific Theatre in 2019, but that of course doesn't cover 2020. And Chapter 6, that wouldn't start until the end of January, moving us into 2020 for the Pacific Theatre, and it's very high chance that Chapter 6 will start at the very beginning of February. If DICE were to carry the Pacific theme over into Chapter 6 a little bit, I don't think it would be a full Pacific chapter again, but maybe sort of like a split chapter with the later stages of it focusing on building up to what's coming next. It is worth remembering that it took DICE about 6 or 7 months before the launch of the Pacific to get everything ready for it, and then everything launched right at the end of October, so if there is another theatre change on the cards for Battlefield 5, likely that's going to mean some extensive work for the development team. It is clear, however, that DICE is planning to continue working on Battlefield 5 after they're done with this Pacific Theatre update. Looking at some of the replies from developers on Reddit, we can already see mentions of work happening for after the Pacific as far back as 3 months ago, or at least that there was going to be some kind of work happening after the Pacific. And we already know that DICE is working ahead internally anyway. That's never really been up for question. Patches are always being built up in advance, content is being planned and created in the background whilst we play other content. DICE is always pretty much working ahead of where they actually are publicly with content and updates, so it might well be possible that the plans for this next shift of wherever we're going to go with Battlefield 5 is already underway. Now for me, the next major shift for Battlefield 5 has got to be towards the Eastern Front and battles between Germany and the Soviet Union. The Eastern Front was absolutely gigantic in World War II, and it featured some of the most iconic battles from the entire war, from intense urban fighting in Stalingrad to all-out vehicle warfare around Kursk. In fact, both of those locations would actually be really good maps for some kind of Battlefield 5 Eastern Front chapter. The Battle of Stalingrad, that started in 1942 and it lasted about 5 months, stretching into February 1943. To this day, it remains the largest and bloodiest battle in the entire history of warfare. Over 2.2 million soldiers took part, and over 1.8 million of those either died or was wounded, or they were captured. Now, the battle ended in defeat for the Germans, and it forced the move of soldiers from the Western Front over to the Eastern Front in order to reinforce defensive lines. Most of the battle was fought on foot by soldiers in the streets of Stalingrad, moving from building to building. They were scrapping for the smallest amounts of ground. German Luftwaffe bombing runs reduced most of the city to rubble, and by November 1942, the Germans had managed to push the Soviets back along the west bank of the Volga River. Now, in a counter-offensive at the end of November, the Soviets flanked the dug-in German army, they broke their defences, and they managed to encircle the remaining German troops in the centre of Stalingrad. The German High Command, they ordered their troops to remain encircled, not to try and break out, and instead, the retreating German forces on the outside of the city, they would try and break through the Soviet lines and allow the Germans within to escape. Fighting continued past the year's end into 1943, by which time the Germans in the city had completely run out of supplies of food, water and ammunition. That was despite stuff being airdropped into them, and on February 2nd, 1943, the German forces in Stalingrad surrendered to the Soviets. Now, Stalingrad could actually be the ultimate urban combat map for Battlefield 5. We do already have a destroyed city map in the form of Devastation, and we also have Rotterdam as well. And of the maps that the game launched with, I think Devastation was the one that felt most like a World War II location to me, but there's opportunity here to emulate one of the most historic and, of course, bloody battles the world has ever seen. House-to-house fighting, that means infantry combat would almost take centre stage, but this could be backed up by ground armour in the form of tanks. The Germans did use tanks at the beginning of the battle to break into the city itself. Now, I was a big fan of the Amiens map in Battlefield 1 that struck a really good balance between infantry and vehicle gameplay in an urban setting, so maybe Stalingrad could be Battlefield 5's Amiens map. And then we've got something at the complete other end of the scale, the Battle of Kursk. This was a massive German offensive that ultimately ended up failing. The objective was to pinch off the Kursk salient with attacks from the north and the south at exactly the same time, and that would eventually lead to the capture of the city and a major blow for the Soviets. Now, attacks from the north, they stalled not long after the battle started. About 4 days later, the Germans got bogged down, and the Soviets launched counterattacks that would see the Germans completely stopped in their tracks. On the southern side, the counterattack actually led to a massive armoured clash between the two armies called the Battle of Prokhorovka. I think that's how you pronounce it. Regarded as one of the largest armoured battles in history, and only recently has been disputed as the largest armoured battle in history. So, can you see my link between the choices of Stalingrad and Kursk now? Both of them are very famous for being absolutely massive battles in their own right. At Prokhorovka, the Soviets managed to stop the German advance at the last heavily fortified defensive line that the Soviets had built up over the last few months before the start of the Battle of Kursk. The Soviets had actually been made aware of the German plan, and they used the time to prepare defences, and they moved armour and soldiers into the region as reserves. Now, the Germans, they lost nearly 300 tanks and assault guns in the battle, and the Soviets over 600. That might sound like a bit of a win for the Germans, but once the German High Command realised that they'd failed in their objective, they called off not just the fighting in the east, but after this point, because of the invasion of Sicily by the Allies, troops never launched an offensive on the Eastern Front again. They never pushed forwards, and the advantage was handed to the Soviets. This really signalled a turning point in the war. The Soviets did all the attacking from that point forward, and the Germans, they had to defend and retreat right up until their surrender in 1945. The Battle of Kursk, or Prokhorovka, could be a massive vehicle-focused map for Battlefield 5, obviously putting huge emphasis on the use of tanks and armoured vehicles to attack and defend locations around the city of Kursk. In my head, I'm kind of imagining the armoured shield map from Battlefield 3, huge open fields, various capture points dotted around the play area, planes in the sky above with infantry supporting and working with ground vehicles to maintain ground. It could be an absolutely huge map, dwarfing anything we've seen so far for Battlefield 5, and that would really symbolise just how big a battle this was in World War II. And of course, let's not forget that if there was to be a Soviet-inspired expansion or chapter for Battlefield 5, then that would surely come with all the bells and whistles, like a new faction, the Soviet Army, new cosmetics, new iconic weapons like the PPSH, the Mosin Nagant rifle, the DP-28 machine gun, and countless others. New vehicles like the T-34 tank and the Yak-9 fighter plane. The list just sort of goes on. Just like the Pacific, introducing a bunch of iconic World War II elements, the Eastern Front with the Soviets would likely very much do the same. And then also, thinking beyond that, later into 2020, probably autumn-winter 2020, how about Operation Overlord? The Allied resurgence in Europe. We've seen DICE execute that beach landing fantasy on Iwo Jima just recently, so is it a stretch to assume that they could do something similar with the Normandy landings in Europe? I think that would be a truly epic experience and a moment in World War II history that almost every single player of Battlefield 5 could appreciate. You could also tie in Operation Overlord with its sort of sister invasion in southern France, Operation Dragoon. This was largely made up of French forces and was supposed to happen simultaneously alongside Overlord, but it was actually delayed until later into the summer. Battlefield 5 had a war story called Tirailleurs that focused on the French colonial forces being brought in to fight in that invasion of southern France in 1944, so having a multiplayer map that focuses on that same area, that could be a really nice link. And then maybe, just maybe, and I'm probably really pushing my luck here, but I'm going to say it anyway, early to mid-2021, how about the race to Berlin? The Allied forces pushing from the west and the Soviets pushing from the east against the German army as they fall back towards Berlin in the final days of World War II. That could probably make for the ultimate end to Battlefield 5, and it would properly fulfill DICE's promise to provide a journey through World War II. Maybe I am being too optimistic for all of this to happen by mid-2021, but you never know. It could end up happening. But now, it's time for me to hear your opinions on this topic. Head down to the comment section below, let me know where you think Battlefield 5 should be going next. Do you agree with me and you think the Eastern Front is the next destination, or maybe DICE would be better off doing something different first of all? Let me know what you're thinking down below in the comments. Don't forget to check out the merch as well, bit.ly/Westie shop. It's the last few days to get that Born to Shield design before we move out and we launch the next design. So if you like this one, go and grab it right now. And whilst you're down there, drop a like on the video as well if you enjoyed it. And of course, the dislike button is there too, although less people are pushing it now, which is great. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.